the folks that you're hearing tonight have filed or are filing very soon, so they will be available for you to search. What we will do is I will let you know the order we're going to go in. Travis Collier, Kia Johnson, Jim Mims, Rebecca Novalis Edwards, Amaris Rivas. The order we're going to go in this evening. Let me see. Cindy, I did not introduce myself and I didn't give you a chance. So I think we know everyone here, but Dolores Delgado Bernal, the co-director of the doctoral program, along with my colleague. Go ahead.
So Cynthia Alcantara, thank you for having us and thank you for joining us. We're really excited to see all these faces here, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to make sure to bring your attention to that, that I just added the link to the presentation. So it's up on the SWAY website, and so you could follow along as they're doing their presentations as well. So I want to make sure you access that as well.
And then just a reminder, or if you've not been at an Ed Talk, we sent a little something out, but they are 5-minute presentations. So you'll actually probably see a timer on the screen. They're 5-minute presentations, and then there is 2 minutes for Q&A immediately following each presentation rather than waiting towards till the end. And so again, there are these quick presentations, but a time to tease us, and then 2 minutes. So whether you're student, faculty, staff, colleague of our presenters, have a pencil and paper or something to type out and jot down some questions that you might ask, that you might want to ask, because we've got 2 minutes in between to do some quick questions and responses. Okay. All right, then I would like to start with our first presenter, Travis Collier, Dr. Travis.
All right, so let me see if I can get this share correct. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Travis Collier. My interest, or my topic, is exploring the factors involved to support African-American males' success in mathematics during the early grades. Sort of where I come from on this, the majority of past research on African-American males is persistently talking about achievement or opportunity gap. It also is kind of a deficit mindset, of which it talks about what African-American males are lacking or what they do not possess, or where they score in the area of math. And it's really focused a lot on middle and high school. So I wanted to look at a shift in research where we look at more of improved practices and outcomes for African-American students. I wanted to be more asset-based. What are the things that students are doing well, to present a counter narrative for African-American male students. And I wanted to focus on the early grades, K through 3. A majority of my career has been spent in the middle school and the high school, where I see students who have poor math skills, do not do well in algebra, do not do well in upper math, and then as a result, they kind of fall in line with a lot of the research in which students who do not do well in algebra, who do not do well in secondary math, do not get onto upper mathematics in high school, do not go into college, and then suffer in terms of career choices. So I wanted to kind of go back to early grades and see what can be changed, or what can be found, to see what students do in the early grades that will help them be successful later on in their career in math. So my major theoretical framework was from Yuri Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, in which you look at a student and you look at their interaction with their teacher, with their parent, the home, the classroom kind of being a microsystem. And as the home and the classroom and the other environments operate as mesosystems, those microsystems operating together, how does that individually develop those different ecological systems? How do they individually develop a student? And then also looking at the opportunity to learn, what's the opportunities, the quality of instruction, the time given to instruction, in which students have the opportunity to learn. And then very excited about the concept of ethnomathematics. What's the culture, the environment that a student is born into that may create their systems of learning math? I had 2 research questions. In schools where African-American boys excel in 3rd grade mathematics, what specific combination of instructional factors contribute to their success? And then number 2, in the schools where African-American boys excel in 3rd grade mathematics, what are the specific school, classroom, and home learning environments that address the social emotional needs of the boys, which leads to their success? So what I did, I went to 2 schools in the suburban area that had African-American boys who scored at standard or higher on the state math test. And so I had a total of 4 4th grade boys, 5 5th grade boys at the 2 schools. There were 6 teachers. So the teachers were given Qualtrics surveys. The students were given a survey and an interview in which it was a survey with the parent and the student together. So I looked at the survey, the interview with them, and the survey to come up with findings around qualitative, looking at the teachers' demographics, the parent-student demographics, the math activities in the classroom and the math activities at home. Some of the qualitative things that I found: building mathematical confidence and foundational skills, positive relationships, and math as a long-term investment from all parties involved were key findings. And so some of the conclusions that teacher experience, 2 parents in the home, college and educated parents, professional occupations were contributing factors: positive and supportive relationships, building mathematical confidence, positive affirmations, positive perceptions of math, the frequency of math activities, and again, math is long-term investments. What I will conclude with, what you do find out is you have a very short time to get your dissertation. And I would say my future research, I would definitely want to do a longitudinal study in which I can follow these kids over time to see if these continual factors contribute to success for math for them. I would love to include the effects of race. I did not really get a chance to talk a lot about race, about their culture, and dive more into culturally relevant teaching and culturally relevant pedagogy and how it affects their math success. That was a fast 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Travis. If you want to stop screen, we will do 2 minutes of questions. I can kind of facilitate that, but at least this way you can see your colleagues or faculty. You're getting lots of love for that presentation you just did, piloting our Ed Talks and being the first one to pilot. So thank you, Dr. Travis. Questions for our first presenter?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So your topic is huge and broad. How were you able to narrow down your framework? I feel like that's one of the areas where I struggle, is that there's so many pieces of different frameworks that could possibly fit in, and really kind of just narrowing it down to where it's just enough to make sense.
Sure. Great question. That was a very difficult thing because I really wanted to add the element of race into my analysis, but I had to just narrow it down to just the interaction between the parents, the teachers, and the students, and really just look at the microsystems around. So Bronfenbrenner was kind of like the major framework. And then when I said, look at the opportunity to learn, I tried to look at all the different things that students were exposed to. And then ethnomathematics, I dabble with that, but I was not able to get into the culture of the students as much. So that's kind of a continuing factor. One of the things I will find interesting when you talk about students from different countries, where 0 is not a number, that they don't read left to right, they may read right to left. those factors come into play when it comes to learning mathematics. So fascinating, but I had to narrow it down to really looking at just what's the interaction for those students in those classes with their parents. And yes, that was difficult, but try to narrow it down to a very narrow focus was difficult. But I really just wanted to look at interactions that the students had and how influential those interactions were.
Thanks for that question, Lou, and Dr. Travis, thanks again for kicking us off on this. And again, that was the teaser, that was the trailer to the full dissertation that will be published, and you can look it up very, very soon. We'll keep this rolling with Dr. Kia Johnson, who will share her research next.
Thank you. Let me get my logistics together. Okay. That looks good to everyone? Awesome. Alrighty, so good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Kia Johnson. I'm still getting very used to hearing that, but I am super excited to be sharing what came from my research. This was grounded in work that I did prior to the job I'm in now, where I managed Title III Part A grants for the consortium in Virginia. So those were our districts that received $10,000 or less in Title III funds to support their English language acquisition programs. So the goal of my research was to chat with the coordinators that I once had a relationship with, and I wanted to be able to highlight practices that I knew from my work overseeing them and supervising them. I'm highlighting how they were making things work in their context. Because they were consortium districts, it usually meant they had 100 or less English learners in their on their enrollment roster for the entire district, and received, like I said, less than that $10,000 in Title III funds, but they had great success happening for their students. And I wanted to be able to just really know more about what their practices were, how their context may have played into some of the strategizing they had to do as leaders, and how they were able to evaluate their program to find out what was working, what wasn't working, and to make sure that their programs were supportive for the Ls. So out of this research, I was looking through the lens of contextually responsive leadership. Again, just how did they respond to being in a district with a low amount of ELs? Ended up having districts where the majority of them were classified as rural in our locale classifications for the state of Virginia. I believe there were 5 rural districts and 1 that was classified as like a distant town. So I was looking through contextually responsive leadership and then how they were able to hopefully implement some sort of distributive justice in using those Title III funds, and if they were leveraging anything else to support their programs. But out of that research, I ended up kind of coining a combination or a new little style of leadership that I am calling Bless Your Heart leadership, because 68 of our 133 divisions are in the Virginia Consortium, and there's a diversity of coordinators in those districts. But all of those that responded to my interview requests and my snowball sampling outreach ended up being white females. So I ended up interviewing 8 white females from 6 of our low incidence districts in Virginia, and discovered during those conversations that there was a lot of empathy and a lot of what we just like to call, that the bless your heart kind of mindset, but it wasn't from like the patronizing way that sometimes bless your heart can mean, but more so because their hearts kind of bled for that population of students, and they were given the responsibility of making sure that not only was their program compliant for those ELs by law, but it was just culturally and linguistically supportive for those students, and a way for the families to also feel like they were welcome and included in the district. So we brought those 2 theories together and came up with Bless Your Heart leadership, which is really Title III coordinators using compassion to really drive that advocacy in their leadership. And my research questions were, what contextually responsive strategies do Title III coordinators in low incidence districts employ to evaluate and address the needs of their ELs in their programs? And then how do they evaluate their programs so that they can make sure they're doing equitable distribution of their resources to provide opportunities for ELs? And so through my thematic analysis, we came up with found seven themes, three that kind of answered to contextually responsiveness and four to program evaluation and distributive justice. And some of those findings were they had to be adaptive and inclusive. They had to really use their knowledge of the law to make sure that everyone in their district was doing what they needed to do. One of the quotes I actually got in that interview was that an audit is a beautiful thing. They actually enjoyed their federal program monitoring visits because if they got a finding, they could go to their superintendent and say, see, I told you we weren't doing something and it needs to be done, make it happen. The only thing I didn't get to in this research, which I'm hoping for future research, is also looking at outcomes and seeing how they compare to maybe high incidence districts because the practices there, the practices are there, their compliance is there, and I want to know like how the student achievement or is in comparison to districts that have more resources to do what they need to do. And that was a very fast minutes, Travis. Oh my goodness. Felt like I was just sprinting.
But you gave us a nice teaser to, if you can stop share screen.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Dr. You gave us a nice teaser because I now want to know a little more about this Bless Your Heart leadership. I love that. So it was the trailer. We have time also to engage Dr. Kia.
And you want to know more about it, or does anyone else have a question? Because I was like, I can go. It did not start out as Bless Your Heart leadership. I will say that it was out of my defense that I coined the term Bless Your Heart leadership. It was originally just contextually responsive leadership in low incidence districts of Virginia. But in our defense conversation, it really came down to these were 8 just very empathetic white women who wanted to do well for their ELs despite wearing 5 different hats and having $2 to do it and not having their resources, but the students were students and that was their passion and their love. And so it was a here, let me give you a hug. How can I help you? And it came through in their conversations of their leadership. They were borrowing money. They were reaching out to universities. They were using local restaurants. They were making sure students could get credits for having jobs after school. It was whatever needed to happen for the students to make it to graduation and their families to feel included. And it really was just like that, the heartfelt bless your heart and not the like patronizing one that came through in their leadership.
Love it. Love it. Thank you. We have time for one more question if somebody wants to jump in real quick.
It's extending the reach of the discussion, but I'm curious with kind of the current political movement and the threats to those different titles, if you saw anything that would be translatable, in hedging against that, or, in the event that that funding that could be, potentially transferred.
Yes, so absolutely. That was one of my thoughts as I was writing the findings after election, because these interviews actually took place right before the election, and then I was writing and putting it together after the election. And so part of what came out of this research is because they already had little Title III funds, they weren't dependent on those funds to run compliant, meaningful programs. And so it was really local funds. It were like I was saying, like university programs, cooperatives in the area, other titles that hopefully get to stay on the docket, like they would share with Title I and Title II. But because they didn't have the funds really to begin with, these are areas at least. There are other areas where they'd be hurting, but these areas because they weren't really dependent on it to begin with, most of these districts had maybe $4,000 in Title III funds, and that's not enough to do more than buy some books or elevation or programs. They already were thinking of how to be creative to find funding to make sure the students had what they need. So I think they're actually going to be really good examples for if this Title III funding does go away, what do we do to fund our programs and where do we look? I think this is going to really help kind of provide that guidance.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank
Mhm.
you. I want to keep us moving, but I failed to say that Dr. Travis's chair is Rebecca Stevenson, and I think that's so important to acknowledge chairs. And Dr. Kia Johnson's chair is Dr. Will Perez. We will move on to, let me see our order. Sorry, I got off of my screen. I believe it is Dr. Jen Mims.
Thank you. I'll also share my screen with folks.
And her chair is also Dr. Rebecca Stevenson.
Are you able to see my poster? I know it's a very jammed poster. Thank you for the thumbs up, everyone. I'll try to zoom in a little bit as I talk through things. But good afternoon and evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Jun Mims. It's my first time saying that out loud, so I do need to work on that more. Use she, her pronouns. My study is titled A Force to be Reckoned, Strategic Equity Sense Leadership of Unit Level DEI Officers. My study focused on examining the voices and experiences of those higher ed leaders who worked on advancing DEI initiatives at the frontline and ground level within an institution. The study came about with the historical and cyclical nature of progress and regression when it comes to educational equity. And, you know, as we were in the recent cycle, a new cycle, beginning in 2020 with the racial reckoning that you know, got birthed from the Black Lives Matter movement, we've, you know, accrued a little bit of progress, but then quickly, you know, turned into regression in the span of last 3-4 years. And now we're seeing those active threats being made against institutions and the individuals who are trying to advance those DEI efforts in the education field in general. So naturally, I think it became very critical for higher ed administrators, regardless of their positions, to finesse this climate that we're in right now and continue to instill the agency and that distribution of agency within their colleagues and community. So by focusing on the leadership praxis of unit level agents who are often not highlighted in literature, this study was designed as a little bit of effort to intervene the historical progress and regression cycle. So my research had two-pronged questions. One focused more on, you know, how the DEI leaders work to advance organizational transformation, and the other one focused on their individual leadership praxis using equity sense. And equity sense is a term coined by Cheng in 2023. It really talks about how folks make meaning of DEI initiatives and the DEI concept in their work setting, and use that definition to guide action further in their work and in their colleagues' work. The study was designed as a qualitative case study. It took place at a particular higher ed institution in a West Coast state, you know, based on the characteristics of the institution. I worked with 11 participants who were recruited very carefully using purposeful sampling to ensure representation across the divisions at an institution, various hierarchical levels with the position, and social identities as well. Data collection included collection of institutional documents and archives, as well as 90-minute semi-structured interviews. And data analysis started with the document analysis to paint the picture around the context of the institution, and then further went into deep dive in the interviews transcripts using reflexive thematic analysis in 2 coding cycles. It really helped me identify emerging patterns and themes and deeper meaning of their experiences and challenges that they were facing. And after those 2 cycles of coding and analysis, I also put them all together in the data triangulation to make sure my findings were, valid and trustworthy. The key finding I want to highlight today, and I can kind of zoom into this image right here, and it's very microscopic right now. The key finding I want to highlight is on the equity sense-giving strategies used by the participant. Largely, there were 4 main strategies emerged through the analysis, and they include how the participants use, I'm going to scroll down. Participants used community building strategies to restore trust with those that they were serving, and build further relationships to instill their agency. They continue to offer educational opportunities for folks that they worked with to build their capacity as an agent of change. And what was also intriguing was how my participants often, collected their community's needs and translated using the research and assessment-based language to communicate those needs to the higher ups, whether it's board members, executive leaderships, to convey the importance of the changes that are being proposed. And lastly, as they communicated, they also tapped into those individuals who are in the positions of authority and privilege as the institution to leverage their power to influence further change. And with this finding that I'm highlighting, one of the recommendation I am posing is for the executive leaders at the university to consider forming and engaging with the unit level DEI officer council. Not only, and usually at the institutions, there are more senior level councils that's being formed and occurring and reporting up to the executive level. However, they don't typically include those in entry and mid-level positions to learn about their work, their experiences, challenges, and recommendations that really comes directly from the ground up. So that's one of the recommendations that I'm posing. With that, I think my study was another opportunity to convey how apparent it is to highlight UDO's work and experiences and the essential role that they're playing in all stages of forming, facilitating, assessing, and cultivating the culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and belonging at an institution. So, using their equity sense, it's coming from their personal experiences and social identities, guide their strategies, and their sense-giving strategies, only further benefit the institution as a whole. So I thank everybody who's working in those capacity, and excited to continue perhaps expanding the knowledge that I gained through this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jin. And I have to say, you took us up a notch on the technology of these ed talks, doing the Zoom in. Very, very nice. I think we have time for, let's get at least one question in here.
Hi, Jen. It's so good to see you. I feel like it's been a long time.
Yes.
I'm curious if I don't know when you actually defended and published, but I'm curious if you did any follow-up with your collaborators, or if there was any of your content of your dissertation that you had to change with this new administration's executive orders and this really aggressive ban on DEI, or how you kind of handled that, or if you were done before that.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, for that question. So I think it's similar with what Kia had mentioned or shared about her study. My data collection happened between April and August of last year. At that time, the participants were talking still with a sense of hope, right? Because we're getting towards the elections. I haven't had a chance to look back with those individuals, but I was, concluding the writing of the dissertation this semester. So I definitely had to do some rework of my recommendations, like a chapter 5 or 6, I guess. I don't know where I ended up in now. Yeah, so that work was definitely done. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, appreciate your work, Dr. Jen, and we will move to our next presenter, Rebecca Novalis Edwards. I am Rebecca's chair, and you can share screen, Rebecca, Dr. Rebecca. When you're ready, we'll start timer.
Okay, sorry, I was waiting for my narration. You can see everything okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. I have so much to say about this topic, but I'd like to start by describing kind of what compelled me to pursue this research. As a social studies teacher, I had the privilege of working with high school students in a social justice program called the Social Justice Institute in a very large public high school in New Jersey. This is actually the program that my collaborators from my research were alumni from, so it's even more special to me now. And this teaching experience was profound for me, not only professionally, but personally, because it was really the first time that I began to explore my own white identity and what that meant as a teacher and a woman in this country and in this world. So around 2020, I started, as sure all of you had too, started seeing this increasingly aggressive backlash against social and racial justice education. It was being inaccurately slapped with this umbrella term of critical race theory and was being described as divisive, anti-American, and even harmful, really without understanding what was happening in the classroom or hearing from students themselves. And I started to see that critical race theory really became the scapegoat, and racial justice education was being politicized, censored, and banned under this guise of protecting students. And so I found myself really, like, as a social justice, social studies teacher, really troubled by this dissonance. And I needed to ask, what's really happening when students are engaged in this kind of education? And I wanted to hear from students themselves. So my study examined the impact of a social justice high school program through the voices of the alumni. I used critical race theory and critical whiteness studies as guiding frameworks and focused particularly on these frameworks' emphasis of and Paulo Freire's idea of critical consciousness, which is the ability to understand and recognize social, political, and economic forces that shape your individual identity in society and how to take action against those that are oppressive. So my first research question focused on understanding how alumni reflected overall about learning about racial justice in this program. And my second research question focused specifically on their understanding of their own and others' racialized identities and how they felt that education contributed to that. And then my third question was really interested in seeing what relationship or connection alumni made between their experience in that program and their civic and social action engagement after the program. So I used a mixed methods approach. I used a survey first and then used those findings to inform my focus group's talking points. And what I found really challenged this anti-CRT and anti-social justice education narrative, like in all ways. So students of color described feeling deeply affirmed by the curriculum. For many, they said it was the first time that their histories, cultures, and identities were centered, not as side notes, but as essential to understanding US history and society. This validation then fostered confidence, voice, and this sustained commitment to advocacy. And white students, on the other hand, shared that while the experience was sometimes uncomfortable for them, it was necessary and transformative. And they developed the tools to recognize privilege, examine bias, and actively work towards allyship. But what stood out across all identities was this development of critical consciousness during their time in this program. So they didn't just leave the high school more historically informed. They said that they left more informed about who they were and who they wanted to be. And so I think this consciousness is not only essential for promoting equity, but really for democracy. And then after high school, many of these collaborators were involved in community organizing, political action, and civic leadership. And they identified as like seeing themselves as part of something bigger. So they didn't leave high school disillusioned. They left prepared to engage and to organize and act together. And this is what I personally believe is the core purpose of a democratic society, of education in a democratic society, right? Not just to transmit knowledge, but to really prepare students to participate fully and ethically and critically in civic life. So I offered 3 core recommendations for practice. The first was teaching race through an intersectional lens. The collaborators in my study said that it was very powerful to learn about the ways that race intersected with other identities and really helped them understand the complexities of oppression and privilege and helped them build solidarity. My second recommendation was really to make sure that we're explicitly teaching about whiteness, so white supremacy, white privilege, white fragility, and not just racism. So not just focusing on the experiences of those affected by racism, because then we leave out the structures that maintain that inequality. And third, I propose that white teachers really must engage in an ongoing critical reflection about their own racial identity. They need to be equipped to examine their privilege biases and teaching practices.
Time's up. Alert. Time's up. Alert.
So what I've learned from my research is that our students are really hungry for this knowledge. They want to make sense of the world. They want to engage with their peers across lines of differences in order to make change. I included this bell hooks quote that's like my guiding principle: the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility, because my research really affirmed this. Our students are ready and they're capable and they're asking us to meet them with truth and not fear. So what I've learned is that, you know, when we censor this racial justice education, we don't just lose curriculum, we lose the chance to develop citizens who are equipped to analyze inequity, act with empathy, and engage in this democratic process. And, you know, this is especially important right now in this political moment. So thank you. Yes, very fast 5 minutes. But
Thank you, Rebecca. But you, like all the presenters before you, certainly stepped to the moment in terms of those 5 minutes and giving us the teaser. Let's see if there are any questions for Dr. Rebecca.
I have a question for you, Dr. Rebecca. Great topic, and thank you for having the bravery to address it. Did you have any pushback from conservative parents or students?
So my collaborators were all in their 20s. They were my students. They graduated between the years of 2014 and 2020. So they were all adults. So I never had to talk to their parents. But when I was teaching in that program, Travis, in that high school, no, because students elected to be in that program, in that small learning community. So it wasn't, that was not how US history was taught outside of this small learning community. So it was this understanding that like the parents were all super progressive, the students wanted to be in the social justice small learning community because they elected to be in it. I don't know if that's what you're asking.
No, you answered it.
Yeah. I will say, unless anyone has another question, but to follow up on what I was asking Jen, I did have to change a lot of my writing and my concluding chapter because even since I started this research, there's now an executive order from this past January ending this radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling. So there was a lot of updates that I had to do, and you know, it was much different. I think especially my concluding, my draft was much different than my final because I had written it after this new administration had come in. And so now it wasn't just like, there's a fear that this will happen on a federal level. Now it actually did. So a lot can change. You know, I started this program 4 years ago Trump was president and ended it. So a lot changed, but I'm really grateful for it. And it has actually inspired me to want to keep advocating for this.
Thank you for the questions, and thank you, Dr. Rebecca. We are going to move to our last presenter, Dr. Amaris Rivas, who I am also Dr. Rivas's chair. You can go ahead and share screen.
All right. Can everybody see?
Yep.
And here? Okay, great. Just gonna hide this. Okay. All right. So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Amaris Rivas, and my research is entitled Empowering Education, Unveiling the Strategies of Latina Elementary Principals in Cultivating Culturally Responsive Learning Environments. My research is deeply rooted both personal experiences and professional purpose. I will say that when I started this program and I started my research, I was in fact a Latina principal at an elementary school. And so this definitely stemmed from a personal place for me when I was inspired by, an experience as a child where I felt cultural exclusion and language suppression in school when I was basically told, just not to speak and definitely not in Spanish. And so that message made me question whether I belonged in school at a very young age. But it also planted the seed for my life's work, ensuring that no child ever feels that their identity must be silenced. So it was very, very affirming for me and very foundational in my definition of who I was at that time and who I've become. The purpose of my study is to amplify the leadership strategies of Latina elementary principals who are cultivating inclusive and culturally responsive learning environments. I framed this work. To frame this work, I drew from three very powerful frameworks. And so one was Chicana Latina feminist epistemology, which honors lived experiences, cultural intuition, and ancestral wisdom. Second was Yoso's community cultural wealth, which is a model which highlights the assets communities of color bring, like familial, aspirational, and resistance capital. And then thirdly was Borda's Principles of Latino Leadership, which emphasizes unity, a collective power, and leadership rooted in culture. And so that figure that you see there was, I kind of came upon this, or I just developed this. It kind of developed through this process. I really wanted something visual to really kind of show where my thought process was with these frameworks. You'll see that in the center of the head. Those are just three of the 8 elements of Chicana Latina feminist epistemology. And for my study, I really focused on the cultural intuition, the spiritual activism, and the pláticas. And then branching out from there were the capitals that that Yoso really shared that assets of communities of color bring. And then the actual principle, going back to that, those are capitals that communities of color bring where they are, whatever they're doing, not necessarily leaders or school leaders. These are capitals they bring with them on a daily basis. However, and then moving into Bordas, these are really specific to leadership. Not necessarily just in school, but leadership when there are Latinos in a leadership position and principles that guide their style, right? Ideas like gozar la vida, si se puede. So I use pláticas, which is a culturally grounded method of conversation used to gather stories. And I gathered stories from 5 current Latina principals that serve in urban Title I schools, elementary schools. And these were not just interviews. That's why I'm deeply in love with my research, is because this was a shared space of meaning making and reflection. And I was able to analyze this data because of the way that the research, the findings grew within the conversations. I was able to use deductive and inductive coding strategies because there was many that was aligned with my questioning, and then so much more new information that came out and was made meaning making through this process. So I had 2 guiding questions. The first was, how do Latino principals reflect on early experiences and how do these shape their leadership? And then what strategies do they use to create culturally responsive learning environments? And so when looking at my work, I looked at it in two parts, early and then current, right, practices. What was the early experiences? What was the foundation of those early experiences? And where does that show up in their current strategies? And while I was doing this, I started to notice some themes, and 6 themes did emerge. That of familial and community bonds, showing that leadership was grounded in relational trust, cultural identity and pride, resilience and resistance, advocating and challenging inequities, education and knowledge, so that data-informed, equity-focused instruction, collaboration and collective power, and navigating oppressions, strategic leadership and inequitable systems. And so these principles in my study, they exemplified collectivist and relational leadership. Their decision-making is informed daily by cultural wealth that they brought with them to work every day, and intergenerational wisdom. They didn't just lead schools, they transformed them, and their work bridges personal history with systemic changes. And so this study just really affirms that culturally responsive leadership is not a checklist, it's actually a way of being, and it's deeply rooted in identity, values, and community. And so finally, the implications of my study urges researchers and readers alike to consider the recruitment and support of more Latina leaders in K-12 education, embedded culturally responsive training and leadership preparation, and most importantly, recognizing lived experiences as a strength and not a sidebar in developing future school leaders. And I do want to close with the words of Dr. Antonia Pantoja, a trailblazing Puerto Rican educator, social worker, feminist, and social rights leader, who dedicated her life to advancing educational opportunities for Latino youth. And one of her most powerful affirmations was, I make the future, you make the future, we make the future. And her legacy reminds us that leadership grounded in culture, equity, and purpose doesn't just respond to the present, it boldly shapes the future.
Thank you, Dr. Amaris. Appreciate this presentation, all the presentations. We have a little time left for some questions for Dr. Amaris.
Dr. Amaris, nobody's surprised that I'm asking this question. I am also looking at using Pláticas and also experienced that linguistic exclusion and cultural, just the force of assimilation. So my question is, when you are part of the data, how do you balance your experiences with the research, with what your comadres were saying? Like, was there a strategy for writing that so that it was balanced?
I just validated where I made it a point in my writing. Thank you for your question too. I put it in my writing that these were the questions that I asked, right? And then I did make connections similarly to mine, and I did write my dissertation. Take some time to read it if you'd like. It does.
Front to back, señora, the whole thing.
So, my chapters 1 and 2 start off with personal narratives. Chapter 1 starts off with my childhood, and chapter 2 starts off with a very memorable moment as an educator too. So I did embed my experiences in there and use that in my writing as well. The majority does come from the collaborators, but with Pláticas, you are making meaning together. And so it just kind of all meshes together. You don't really have to like separate it. It just all makes the meaning together. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question and for the presentation. I'm going to hand over to Cindy, but I wanted to first just say this was amazing. I'm so glad. This has been, Cindy, in our year, we just keep saying we're piloting something new, piloting different things. And piloting this is, I hope folks agree, this is something to make sure we have more students next year doing. I want to let all students that are on right now know that over the summer, we will reach out to all of our students that Cindy and I will be holding a workshop on how to propose to the American Educational Research Association, AERA, is actually going to be in Los Angeles next April. It's the largest educational research association in the country, internationally actually. And given it's in our backyard, downtown LA, we're hoping that Some of you who will be graduates by then, some of you that are going to be in the process will be at this point next year, or maybe at an earlier point, we can work on either panels or these ed talks, which will be part of AERA next year, submitting. So be on the lookout for an email inviting you over the summer to participate in a workshop if you're interested in presenting. I'm going to hand over to you, to Dr. Alcantar.
And I'll add that at the very least, these 5 should be submitting, because you did the hardest job, which was turning a marathon into a sprint. If you all don't know yet, if you haven't opened up a dissertation document quite yet, these are 100-page, sometimes plus documents turned into one slide, y'all. Like, this is a lot. And so it's big, and this is on top of work, on top of your different roles. So I also commend you for those things as well. And thank you to the chairs. This is a lot of labor of love that we got to see poured in, as well as all the schools and the teachers and the educators and the students that you all engage with. Like, this speaks to all the amazing work that you all did, all the work that will be coming from those of you that are in attendance now that are thinking about proposals and so forth. We thank you, and we're so proud of you. This is really cool to kind of see your work at the end, and I'm excited to see what comes with it.